Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Pathways to Family Wellness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Brendan Riordan, pediatric and family chiropractor. And joining me today, we've got a special guest, John Ohm, the managing editor of Pathways to Family Wellness magazine. Thanks, John. Appreciate you joining us.
Awesome. It's really great to be here. Thank you, Brandon, for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a long overdue conversation. You're kind of the mind at the time behind a lot of what goes into the magazine, which is then the inspiration for the podcast. So it's like getting to talk to that little voice inside my head that's choosing everything that we're going to go over. So I really appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, awesome. I love your podcast. I love that you're doing it. It's such a great feedback too to listen to your podcast and hear you talk about the articles that we have. So yeah, it's really cool.
Yeah, it's got to be great also to hear some of the interviews with certain authors. And
Oh yeah.
yeah. And recently in our, well, one of the more recent editions, we've got the spring one, I believe. Yeah, spring of this year, 2023. There's a lot of articles about German new medicine, which I've noticed a certain tone leaning in that direction lately, and I think it's a really fascinating one. So, and then you even contributed a few articles in that arena as well, and I know this is a passion of yours. So, I'm wondering if we can jump right in, and you can let us know a little bit about what is German new medicine, what's the reason why those are appearing now in Pathways, and how you got interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So German medicine is a major, the way I describe it is it's a major advancement in our understanding of biology. It's really situated on these major discoveries of biology, focusing on the brain and the nervous system. And the person who made these discoveries was a doctor by the name of Riordan Hammer. And he was really like the perfect individual to make these discoveries. He was the youngest medical doctor in the country of Germany to gain his medical license. Yeah, I think he still has that title today. Yeah, he was a medical inventor, just like a genius in biology, right? He was born to be a doctor and to study biology. And the way I really see him is he was like a Renaissance man of our time. He gifted us with this huge body of work that we now know of as the German New Medicine. So yeah, it's a huge topic. I got interested in it. Well, first it was my mom who suggested I look into it, and back in 2014 too.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and at the time I was doing nutritional stuff, detoxing, eating a bunch of vegetables, and I actually blew it off. She said, "You should look into this." I said, I don't need to. I know what health is all about. You eat right, you detox. And
I actually
around
remember some of those articles in Pathways as well, the tone, like
yeah,
in the Pathways of that time. So I remember some of those nutrition-based articles. Yeah.
yeah,
And they were good.
definitely.
There was good information there. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We had that in Pathways in the past for sure. I mean, it's a hugely important aspect of health and
hmm
biology is nutrition. So it wasn't until 2017 when she said, "Oh, you should look into this." I said, "Okay, fine, I'll look into it." I was working for Pathways at the time and started to look into it. And about an hour into reading, I was like, oh my God, this is major. This is a huge revelation here. And so I just kind of jumped in from there, and then that's when we started publishing some articles. And yeah, I took it from there, and I've been studying it ever since. So yeah, to describe what the German New Medicine is, I describe it as a discovery of the brain and the nervous system and a series of discoveries of biology. And what this discovery is in a word, it's a biological program of adaptation. And what these are organ-specific cellular changes or adaptations that are directed and controlled from the brain. Where you'll find a specific concentric ring. It's actually a spherical formation. It's called a Hammerherd. Its herd is German for lesion, and this lesion exists over top a specific brain relay that controls the organ's function. And so you have this biological program of adaptation running from the brain, controlling a specific organ cellular change, all in response to a biological conflict shock, which is a unexpected, acute emotional distress that catches us on the wrong foot, as Hammer would describe it. And so it's an intelligent adaptation of the body kind of in addition to like a fight or flight response of the nervous system. Well, here we're discovering there's more. There's more than just the fight or flight response. There's these biological programs that can affect the organs of the body to respond and help us adapt to these challenges in life, these conflict shocks that take us by surprise. The real significant and major, groundbreaking aspect of the German New Medicine is how it shows us that that disease symptoms, what we've been calling disease symptoms in history, are really normal, natural, and predictable consequences of these biological programs. So it's a major revelation about the nature of disease symptoms, where depending on the biological program that's running, you'll have symptoms arise in the conflict active stress adaptation phase, where the cells are adapting, or in other organs and in other biological programs, you'll have the symptoms arising in the post-conflict healing or restoration phase, where the body begins to reverse those cellular changes. So most of our common ailments and symptoms arise in this second phase, this healing phase, where the body reverses those previous adaptations to bring the organ back to normal function and normal tone, or what it's called in German medicine, normatonia. Yeah.
So they talk about tone in German New Medicine.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah, 100%. The normatonia. So you have the sympathetic active phase, or this sympathetic atonia. That's the conflict adaptation phase. And then you have the post-conflict healing phase, which is vagatonia in German medicine. And then when you go through the whole biological program and you regain normal function, you have normatonia. Okay. Yeah.
And now, to differentiate the two phases, you've got your active conflict phase, and then your the healing phase, which comes after that. And so you're likening that the active phase is similar to like our fight or flight response, but it's just with greater depth of understanding of like what's involved in the physiology of something like that, right? Because typically we might think of it as like, okay, my pituitary releases certain organs certain hormones along the HPA axis, and then that activates certain changes within the body. But you're saying there's even additional elements to it with German New Medicine, right? There's a greater level of complexity with that.
Yeah, so we can jump into the nature of these organ adaptations.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. So they vary according to the biological program that's running and the organ that's affected. Let's see. They really depend on it's more specific than just the organ that's adapting. It's specific to the germ layer of the organ. So
like endothelium versus, like what that, like certain...
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, there's three germ layers. There's the endoderm, the mesoderm, and the ectoderm. The endoderm is the innermost germ layer.
Yeah.
And it's actually controlled from the oldest part of the brainstem. And then you have the mesoderm, the middle germ layer, and the ectoderm, the outer germ layer, controlled from different parts of the brain, the middle of the brain, and then the cerebral cortex. And so if you look at any biological program, it's going to be in one of these parts of the brain, governing a specific organ, affecting a specific germ layer. So if we look at like the kidney, which is a complex organ composed of 3 different germ layers, you have a biological program that can run affecting the endoderm of the kidney. And these are the kidney collecting tubules in medicine. And you'll find that biological program running from the brainstem of a specific relay in the brainstem that governs and adapts a change in the endoderm of the kidneys. And because it's affecting the endoderm, you have this cellular process of cell multiplication occurring in the endodermal tissues to serve a biological purpose. I think we'll get into that when we go into examples. Yep. But just to add to the nuance here, if the ectodermal portion of the kidney is affected by a biological program, such as the renal calyx, then you get a completely different biological program from a different part of the brain, from the ectoderm of the brain. And there you'll find the concentric ring formation adapting the renal calyx or the ectoderm of the kidney. And here you don't get cell multiplication as the cell adapts, you get cell ulceration. Yeah, but in both cases, with these adaptation phases, they're followed by a post-conflict healing phase where the organ reverses those adaptations by either breaking down the additional cells or replenishing the ulcerated cells. And this is where you get the variation in symptoms. Another really interesting point, just to bring this up here, is in this post-conflict replenishing phase or restoration phase, you have the activation of microbes in the body. So the nervous system and the brain actually turns on specific microbes to help reverse and restore the organ back to its normal function and its normal tone. So in the case of the cellular growth in the endodermal tissues, you get a process of cell breakdown of those growths. And bacteria and microbes will serve that process, in particularly tubercular bacteria and mycobacteria, the old bacteria in our body. They were already there in our body, in our microbiome, right? Not doing anything. But as soon as we enter into this healing phase of this program, they become activated, and then they serve this purpose of breaking down the cells. Same goes for replenishing cells. Newer mycobacteria and bacteria will serve this process of helping restore the ulcerated tissue.
That's fascinating.
Yeah,
it's
major.
much more complex because we typically think of resolution of anything involving an inflammatory process, and that is complex in and of itself in terms of what happens. But this is even more nuanced than that. It sounds like for some aspects of what's happening, there could be an inflammatory process, and for others, there's more of a breaking down. Like a more of a metabolic process than an inflammatory process.
Yeah, and these
catabolic, I guess.
Yeah. To understand these processes, it really is helpful to understand the purpose of the organ adaptation in the first place. Why the cells multiplied in this part of the endoderm of a given organ, or why they ulcerated to begin with, leading to this post-conflict healing phase after the conflict is resolved. So yeah, I just want to mention, like, what we just discussed in that brief amount of time actually summarizes 4 of the 5 biological laws in German new medicine. So I just want to kind of recap these and put these out.
We're in the weeds already. This is good.
We're right into it. Yeah. I've been so excited for this conversation. So just real quickly, the first biological law, and people often ask me, what's a biological law? Like that's a new idea for a lot of people. Well, one example of a biological law is every human organism has to have a mother and a father in order to exist. The phenomenon here is the birth of a human organism. Well, for that to happen, every one of them has to have a mother and a father, a sperm and an egg, right?
Yes.
Well, these are biological laws, in which case they're describing the phenomenon of the biological program. And in each case, and here's the first biological law, you have to have a biological conflict shock to initiate the program in the body. So that's the first part. The second law is what we were describing, the law of 2 phases, that you have this conflict active phase, turning on the biological program where it operates from the brain and in the organ. And then you have this post-conflict healing phase where the organ is restored back to normal tone. That's the second biological law. And the third biological law is really talking about these embryological germ layers, which determine the nature of the cellular adaptation, cell growth, or cell ulceration. It's called the ontogenetic system of tumors or cancers and cancer equivalents. But it's just talking about the germ layers and how important those are for distinguishing different biological programs running from the brain. And then the fourth biological law is the ontogenetic system of microbes. Just saying that, microbes participate in this process in the healing phase. They serve a important role to bring the organ back to its normal pre-adaptation state.
As a part of the healing phase, right? Because a lot of times when we hear microbes and replication, we instantly think infection must be treated, but you're what you're
Right.
describing is something that is participating in the healing process and an intelligent adaptation as a part of the healing process. But I'm sure we can jump into that a little bit more. So I don't want to
Yeah,
stop in
yeah.
the flow of the five systems here.
Yeah, I'll get into the fifth biological law in a second.
Okay.
I do want to address that point because it is such a major shift in our understanding. You
Yeah.
know, it's we've had this pathological or pathogenic kind of framework of understanding microbes for a long time, and we couldn't understand why one person would get sick and another person wouldn't. They both had the same microbes in their body, but one would have an active phase or an activity of the microbes and another person wouldn't. What's the difference here? You know, we had this construct of an immune system,
Yep.
you know, defending against the invader. But really what we're looking at here are these newly discovered biological programs that make sense of the whole thing.
And many times the invader's already inside of us. So that's
Yeah,
really
exactly.
like a mind warping sort of thing to wrap your head around of,
Yeah.
the things were already in there. Yeah.
Yeah, remember the article on I think it Masha and Dasha, the conjoined
Oh yeah.
twins?
Yep.
Why does one of the conjoined twins get sick and not the other? Well, there's something about the nervous system that we understood that
Yeah.
the nervous system in one of them was more healthy, able to respond to their biological conflicts, if you want to put it into this context.
Yeah.
And the other one was not in an adaptive state, necessitating biological programs of adaptation. So it does really center on the nervous system, this whole discussion.
I would encourage our listeners to check that out. It's a very fascinating piece about that. I'm forgetting the time period they were around, but there's a couple different sets. Masha and Dasha are one of them, of these co-joined twins. So basically joined together, but they each have their own brain, each have their own nervous system, but they have a lot of shared organ systems. So there's a lot of organs that are shared, a lot that are separated, and one of them enjoyed great health and one of them was frequently sick. And it's really fascinating to look at some of the differences between the two of them and what that entailed.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. And it was all about focusing on the nervous system. That was
Yep.
sort of the idea we got from those stories was, okay, we have to focus on the nervous system here because the
Yeah.
blood or pathogens in the blood or whatever doesn't really seem to fit. Something else is at play here.
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, that's why I'm so excited about the German new medicine, because it does bring in this other element. It fits. It kind of puts the pieces of the puzzle together, really.
Yeah.
So just to jump to the fifth biological law, so we were talking about the biological programs of adaptation, their phases, the germ layers that they affect, the activity of microbes in the healing phase. The fifth biological law is called the quintessence of the German new medicine, and it's describing that each one of these biological programs have a significant, meaningful purpose in the body. And that purpose is in direct relation to the exact nature of the conflict that we experience. So specific kinds of conflict shocks will impact a specific part of the brain governing a specific cellular adaptation, all designed to galvanize an effort to overcome that conflict shock. So it's not general stress causes these programs to turn on, and these programs aren't malignancies or errors in the body. They're intelligent. They're there for a purpose, and that purpose is specific to the life experiences of the individual. So
Each one almost has its own charge to it, you would say, or what, or the creates its own imprint in the brain, or concentric
yeah,
sphere, right? In the
yeah, the charge is in the psyche, in our experience,
Okay.
and our perception of the event, the shocking event, and that's what signals the brain to turn on the biological program in this part versus this part, that part. It's all highly significant, meaningful, and intelligent. It's all part of an intelligent response.
Now,
So,
go ahead.
okay, so, I like to talk about the kidney here because it kind
Yeah.
of summarizes. We can go into the nature and the meaning of these biological programs. So we were talking about the endoderm of the kidney collecting tubules. Well, the purpose of the kidney collecting tubules is to process water. That's where water goes through the kidneys and are kind of filtered. Well, in the event of a program affecting this part of the kidney, what you get are these cell multiplications in these tiny microscopic endodermal tissues. The purpose there is to increase the body's capacity to hold on to water And why would that be needed? Because the person experienced a specific kind of conflict called an existence or a refugee or an abandonment conflict. It's a moment in time when they feel like they're a fish out of water, like they're stranded in the desert. They're a refugee, they're abandoned. And so the body responds to that charge or that psyche experience with this biological program of adaptation to allow the kidneys to hold on to water. And it's governed and controlled from the brainstem, from the particular relay in the brainstem that controls those endodermal cells in the kidney. Okay? So that gives you a sense of what a biological program is doing and what the purpose of the cellular adaptation is. Now, if we look at the ectodermal portion of the kidney, which is the renal calyx, it's a little bit lower in the kidney, and it's composed of, squamous epithelial ectodermal tissues. The biological program is run from a completely different part of the brain. It doesn't cause cell multiplication, it causes cell ulceration. And what would be the purpose of ulcerating these tissues? The tissues can ulcerate in the kidney, but also in the ureter, the bladder, or the urethra, the whole urinary tract. So what would be the purpose of widening or opening up this area of the body? It would be to allow easier, faster, quicker urination and to hold more urine. And why is this? It's because the conflict we experienced in life is a territorial marking conflict or a boundary demarcation conflict. So we have to set the boundaries in our territory. And so when a shock happens, something unexpected, somebody crosses the line unexpectedly, okay, I need to mark my territory here. The organism responds with this cellular ulceration in these tissues to allow easier, quicker urination. In the animal kingdom, this is super advantageous, right? Yep. And we're biological animals, right? So that's just the first part. That's the conflict active stress adaptation phase with respect to the kidney. Here we're talking the ectodermal renal calyx. And when you resolve that conflict, when you mark your territory, you solve the territorial dispute, then the body shifts into that post-conflict healing phase. So the ulcerations need to be replenished, and the body will engage microbes to do that replenishing. And this is the phase where we experience symptoms really for the first time in this biological program. And these symptoms are urinary tract infection, okay? Inflammation of the urinary tract, wherever the ulcerations occurred. It could be in the bladder, it could be in your urethra, or further up in the kidneys. Because all three of these parts of the body are controlled from the same relay in the brain. But yeah, this is, so if you have a urinary tract infection, right? What causes that? Is it the bacteria? Did you get an infection from somewhere? No, in fact, you were running a biological program designed to help you in an instance of need, a shocking event, particular kind of shocking event, a territorial boundary demarcation conflict. That's how it's described. And that kind of description, encapsulates the population of people that have experienced urinary tract infections. They've all experienced three things: this unique kind of conflict shock, an imprint in the brain, in the cerebral cortex controlling those organs, and then they'll get the ulcerations and then the infection when you resolve the conflict. So on all three levels, it can be confirmed what is going on here. One more point about the brain. Yeah. This is so much information, I'm sure, but it's been floating in my mind.
I have a lot of thoughts and questions, which is good. So keep going, and then once you're all set, we'll jump into this some more.
Great. Okay. So just one more thought about the brain. The conflict active cellular adaptation phase coincides with this concentric ring lesion in the brain, and you can see that on a CT scan. But then when you shift into that post-conflict healing phase, when you resolve that conflict, the brain formation shifts to an edema. You can see that on a CT scan. So you see the shift in the brain from conflict active concentric rings, this sphere of activity, and then it shifts to edema right at the moment when you resolve that conflict. So that shift coincides also with the shift in the body from unnoticed, ulcerations to to a process of inflammation, and if bacteria are present, the bacterial inflammatory process, all replenishing the tissues of that part of the body. So you can confirm this on multiple levels, and that brain edema, that hammerhead shifting to brain edema, is a huge, important point to point out for anybody who might have the question of how do you know that it's a biological conflict shock that is running this biological program. You go to that, you talk about the edema, because nutrition, just to finish that thought, a shift in nutrition, a shift in lifestyle, supplements, that doesn't shift the hammerhead to an edema. What shifts the hammerhead to an edema is the resolution of the biological conflict. Then you shift into this post-conflict healing phase with edema and the inflammation on the organ, this vagatonic healing phase where you get fatigue, just a whole shift in the nervous system.
Now, does this happen automatically? Does this require awareness on the part of the person that, like, oh, I experienced a conflict shock, I had an issue with a boundary, I did not set the boundary issue, and then let's say the individual then is able to set the boundary, would that shift things? Or is it, because it's so intelligent, does this just take care of itself even if left unnoticed? I'm curious where awareness comes into the picture, or consciousness.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've been running these biological programs for our entire biological existence.
Yeah.
And we didn't know about the germ in medicine. We didn't know these biological programs existed, and yet they still proceeded and they still resolved, and then leading to the inflammatory healing symptoms.
Okay.
So really, life resolves these problems, because the way to understand this biological program, it not only shifts the brain and the organ to create an advantageous cellular adaptation to resolve the problem, it also shifts the psyche. So you can be, when you're conflict active with a program or with a conflict shock, you're perseverating on the problem. It's really in your awareness. It's a problem, right? So naturally, you're going to want to try to fix it. You might wake up in the middle of the night, 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. Classic symptom of waking up in the middle of the night means you're conflict active with this problem. This is just a biological reaction. And so, you're going to be focusing on whatever it is that's the threat or the issue in life naturally, and you're going to try to resolve it or get away from it. And when you do, the body naturally shifts into the healing phase, and then we get these symptoms of expression of reversing that sacrifice of the body to really galvanize this effort. So it's been going on for all of biological history. We didn't need to be quote unquote aware of it specifically. It would still run its course. But this is where we get into the value of German medicine, the value of this knowledge, which is, multifactorial, the value of this knowledge.
Yes.
It's on several levels. There's the cultural value of shifting our cultural fear and reaction to disease symptoms, which is super important. This also ties into avoiding or preventing conflict shocks. We don't want to shock anybody and initiate another one of these biological programs unnecessarily, but we often do that either to ourselves or in a doctor-patient relationship. We can cause conflict shocks if we scare the individual, right? So this is all hugely important to shift our culture and our way of dealing with medical conditions. And then on the personal, individual, practical side of it, if you have a chronic condition, which I'll have to explain what's the reasoning or what's the logic behind.
I was just going to ask that, so that's good. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the German new medicine can be essential in releasing these biological programs when we finally have this information to identify what it is in life that's essentially causing this reaction in the body and the symptoms in the body. Not every biological program runs cleanly and effortlessly, and where you have that healing phase and then the symptoms go away within a few days or weeks, and then you don't have to worry about it. Some people experience chronic conditions, and for the majority of them, it's chronic inflammatory healing phase conditions. So why would the healing phase become chronic? There's an element, some of the length of the healing phase depends on how long the biological program was active, how long we were in that conflict active phase. So that'll determine the length of healing, but not usually more than a month or several months. In some organs, it could be a 9-month period of healing. But so that's one factor that describes the length of healing. But really, when we're talking about chronic conditions, we're talking about an individual who resolved the conflict in life leading to these inflammatory healing, replenishing phase symptoms, but the conflict resurfaces, or something in the individual's environment or psyche is hung up on the conflict. And so what happens is you get these healing phase symptoms, but then the environment or the psyche reignites the biological program a second time, a third time, a fourth time, on and on and on. Each time the person is reconflicted with that DHS shock experience, that initial shock. Okay, so it's really
What does DHS stand for?
Sorry, DHS is just a term for the biological conflict shock. It's that moment in time when we were unexpected with this acute biological distress of a unique nature, right? So yeah, it's essentially just the healing phase is prolonged, hence chronic symptoms, because the conflict is still around in life. We're not really fully resolved with it. So the biological program is ticking on and off, on and off. And this can last for months or years. People have chronic...
Consciously or unconsciously, right? That program is continuing to play.
Yeah, absolutely. Very much unconsciously. It's the biological intelligence that's responding to your environment. And you're here as a human being, not aware, unable to be aware for all of human history of what is it that's causing these symptoms. I guess you can imagine being really tuned in and making the connection that I need to fix this problem. But really, without the biological program and these discoveries, we wouldn't understand why a symptom is chronic. Yeah, it's
other than bad luck or bad genes or things like that, which
or a bad immune system.
Whatever the case may be. One of my favorite quotes of all time, and I've said on the podcast before, but the Carl Jung quote, where until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will continue to run our lives, and we will call it fate, right? And so I think that seems like that applies quite a bit when it comes to German new medicine as well.
Yes, 100%. If the unconscious remains unconscious, then we're not going to have the wherewithal to, in a very practical sense, identify the problem that's repeating itself in life, that's causing this biological adaptation and hence the symptoms.
Like an example might be, let's say someone's in an abusive relationship, for example, right? And there's biological shocks that happen with that. Maybe there's one event, but maybe it's ongoing until the energy shifts around that relationship. That's how something like a chronic condition might arise from those continued, just because the issue's persisting, right?
Yes, exactly. Even to the renal calyx or the urinary tract, relationship issues. That's a common situation here. Is what causes a boundary demarcation conflict to affect the kidneys or the urinary tract, right? And so if that relationship, you have resolution to it at one point, but then you're again not resolved and you get back into conflict activity, you can have these chronic urinary tract infections. So yeah, it's amazing. It's such a valuable body of knowledge because all of the organs of the body follow these patterns. And what Hammer was able to do was identify through 50,000 cases over his, career, identify the common threads for any specific symptom. So if you have chronic bronchitis or a chronic nasal infection or inflammation of the nasals, the question is, what are the unique biological conflicts in life that would initiate these kinds of symptoms?
Yes.
And making those connections and then tying it to the brain and to these embryological germ layers, which reveal the purpose of these symptoms, the underlying biological purpose that preceded, in most cases, the symptoms.
And I'm assuming there's many organs and organ systems involved with any of these processes as well. Like in the example of the kidneys for demarcation or setting a boundary where the tubules are opening up, the collecting ducts, things are opening up that way.
Yeah, the renal calyx,
The renal, oh, thank you. Okay,
ectodermal cells
great.
are ulcerating. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, ulcerating. I'm assuming there'd be also other organ systems involved as a part of that process, or is it more there's like a primary organ that tends to be involved with each of the experiences?
Yeah, awesome question. You can have a single experience activate several biological programs.
Okay.
That does happen. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Multiple organ efforts to resolve the conflict. And yeah, it depends on, what your symptoms are. If you have this sort of syndrome of symptoms, many things happening, then you're looking at something that's really affecting multiple organ systems, which means if it was a single conflict shock, that means the conflict shock was interpreted in several different ways. It was important both in a territorial sense, but also in a morsel sense, or in a self-devaluation sense. And maybe what I can do here is describe the correlation in a general sense of the brain layers, the brain, then the endodermal, mesodermal, ectodermal, embryonic germ layers, and the nature of the conflicts that impact these general three layers.
Sure.
So with endodermal programs affecting the innermost germ layer, such as the kidney collecting tubules, but here another example is the whole digestive tract is composed of endodermal cells. And you have the lung alveoli as another example of endodermal organ. The nature of the conflict shock that runs any of these biological programs is one of a morsel, an indigestible morsel conflict or morsel conflicts. So in the kidney, the morsel is the water. You need to hold on to the water.
Okay.
In the lungs, just to bring this up, the morsel is really the air. The air is the represented morsel that we need in that moment. And in the intestines, we're talking about a food morsel. So the purpose of the cell multiplication in each case is to help us digest or assimilate that morsel that was responsible for the conflict shock, the indigestible morsel. I'll use the example of the intestinal tract here because what's the purpose of a intestinal tumor? Essentially, is what we're talking about as cauliflower-shaped intestinal tumor. Why would that have any purpose in biology, right? Well, in the case of an indigestible morsel, and in an archaic sense, we're talking about a literal food item that gets stuck in the intestinal tract. The biological program turns on, and then you get these additional cell multiplications in that area of the intestines. And what these additional cells do is they secrete more digestive enzymes to break down the morsel, right? So there's a biological purpose to each one of these adaptations with respect to the organ that's affected.
Now, in that example, things could become damaging to the tissues, would you say, as if the biological program is not resolved and continues ongoing, creating more and more and more replication, cell division, to where the tumor continues to grow, for example, and then affect other organ systems?
Yes, exactly. What that means is that the conflict is profound and long-lasting, and so the tissues continue to grow. Often, most of our conflicts, they'll be intense for the first 3 months, and then they'll downgrade naturally. But if you have an intense conflict that's lasting for a long time, like years and years and years, you can get this tissue growth to start to obstruct the organ's passageway for sure. And then that, in which case, it could be a problem. So you have to look at that. It's not just, yeah, it's an intelligent adaptation, but it's a sacrifice of biology to try to resolve this conflict in the moment as it lasts. But if the conflict is just constant, then you can get this, growth that reaches a certain limit, and then you have to really do something about it, right? So chronic conflicts can lead to chronic biological manifestations or large manifestations for sure. Yeah. If we look, this might be interesting for us in chiropractic. If we look into the mesodermal germ layer, the middle germ layer, what we're really looking at here are the musculoskeletal system. There's other organs of the body composed of mesodermal tissues, a lot of them actually, but the musculoskeletal system is really a major component of the mesodermal tissues of the body. And there's a theme to these kinds of conflicts affecting this germ layer, and it's one of self-devaluation, being unable to do something, restricted, inadequate in the moment. Okay. And what happens here, because it's mesodermal, as well as if it were ectodermal, you get the cell ulceration process, not cell growth, you get cell ulceration. And here where in German medicine, this is called the deluxe group, the new mesodermal tissue, like the muscles and the bones. It's called the deluxe group in that the meaning of the adaptation is expressed at the end of the healing phase, not during the conflict active cellular adaptation phase. The purpose of the adaptation is expressed or defined at the end of the healing phase. So here, the ulcerations proceed either in the bones or the muscles, depending on how severe the self-devaluation conflict was. I'm unable to do this. Oh no, right? And the ulcerations proceed to kind of break down the tissue in an effort to reconstruct the tissue in the healing phase, where the tissue becomes stronger than it was before. Okay, so in the case of a bone osteolysis process, that means the individual is conflict active with a self-devaluation relative to that part of the body, and that gets specific. You have different kinds of self-devaluation conflicts that affect either the bones of the head, the cervical spine, the thoracic spine, the lower back spine. It's all different. The knees, for instance. And this ulceration process is part of a design to, when you resolve the conflict, heal these tissues so that the bone or the muscles are stronger than they were before. And so you get this ability now with stronger muscles or stronger bone to resist conflicts similar in the future. So that's why it's called a deluxe group, where you find the purpose of the ulceration or the adaptation arriving after the end of the healing phase. But yeah, musculoskeletal pain. I mean, this is like, this is how far-reaching the German new medicine is. We always thought of musculoskeletal pain, inflammation, joint inflammation, as like maybe it was an injury, and there can be injuries, obviously. Maybe we'll talk about this because I'm sure the listeners may have a question of like, what about injury or other causes of disease? Are you saying that German medicine is the end all be all of all disease causality, But where was I going? It was you can have injuries that affect the musculoskeletal system, obviously, no question there. But when you have inflammation in your lower back and you didn't really injure yourself and it becomes this chronic inflammatory process, you have to look at the biological program that's responsible for inflammation in the healing phase. The inflammation is the rebuilding of those ulcerated tissues. What was the self-devaluation that shocked my brain, causing this concentric ring to appear over top the cerebral medulla relay that controls the muscular part of the musculoskeletal system? You have to understand what that shock was, leading to your symptoms, because what else? So it is a big overarching full body understanding of all the various symptoms that we have in life. Yeah. If you can rule out injury or acute poisoning.
And it seems like there's some common themes in terms of, like, you had mentioned how things show up. For example, self-devaluation is a common theme.
Yep.
My question with a lot of those is so Dr. Hamer was observing these 50,000 different patients throughout his career and noticing some similarities and some trends. Was he then finding out more information about their lifestyle to know that, like, oh yeah, this person is dissatisfied at work. There's a known correlation between dissatisfaction at work and low back pain, because there's a self-devaluation that's happening. Or, for the person that's having a relationship issue, like, were there certain themes he noticed? I'm curious how, because sometimes this can get pretty esoteric, right? We're like, okay, how do we know that we got the right, from an awareness standpoint, that we had the right program, right? Like, was there self-devaluation? Do you know what I'm trying to ask?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sometimes things can seem kind of general, almost like I don't want to this to make it sound bad, but like a horoscope, where like the information you read it and you're like, oh, this is like very, very general, but how do we know we got something that landed with that individual specifically?
Yeah, sure. So it is these general characterizations of self-evaluation. I was talking about morsel conflicts earlier.
Yes.
These are very general descriptors. It gets
Yes.
specific when you get to the location of the body and the organ specifically
Okay.
that's affected.
Yes.
So, for instance, if we're talking about the musculoskeletal issues, if you were to talk about the lower back, it's not, yeah, it is generally a self-devaluation, but it's a central kind of self-devaluation. And what Hammer found was in all these people, they had a kind of conflict of an interruption to their life's work or their purpose in life or their path in life, unable to follow the path that they set out for, all right? Unable. A self-devaluation. I'm not adequate enough to do what I want to do or need to do.
Yes.
And it's a central kind of conflict affecting the lower back. So a good example of this would be, getting fired from a job. Yeah, this was my life's path, and then, oh my God, I lost my job. Losing your job or getting fired or whatever it is. That would be the conflict shock. That's what says I'm inadequate in a very central way regarding my life's purpose and path. And that would be the ulcerations in the lower back, which often goes unnoticed. You don't get the pain of ulcerations in this case. And then when you get a new job, all right, or you get back on your path, you say, no, okay, I'm good. No more self-devaluation here. I'm back on track. That's when you get the inflammation symptoms in the lower back. Like, oh my God, it really hurts. So it's, post-conflict, that's when you get the inflammation after you resolve that conflict. So I got a new job. That's
I've
the
seen how often in our own practice I've seen what appears to be like a commonplace garden variety, like back sprain or strain with, usually it's with men, but we've seen it with that, where they just got a new job and then all of a sudden it's like their body goes out on them and they're like, wait, I was just starting this. This is, I can't afford to not show up to work, or like this just began. So it sounds like that's
yes.
a classic example of like the in between, which is the active phase, and then the healing phase kicks in with that inflammatory response.
Yeah, right when you resolve the conflict, that's a key piece of intel to be able to identify a person's conflict is what did you just resolve prior to the symptoms showing up?
Yep.
That's the key question here. But yeah, you find these patterns. I mean, Hammer was meticulous in making these correlations. Obviously, we're talking about the psyche now being connected to the brain and the organ. So
Yes.
you're in this new realm, this new terrain here. How do you hold an experience and test it? It's a hard independent variable, and
Of course.
to work with. You have to be meticulous in patterns across populations. But yeah, you'll find that in the case. I want to bring up here also, we get the common complaint of sciatica in pregnant moms, right? Lower back sciatic pain. Well,
Sure.
I believe that's connected to the lower back muscles and the bones of the lower back. Right? The nerves are connecting down
course.
there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
The pelvic floor would certainly be involved, right? There's a lot of, yeah.
so, as I think about this, I think about, well, what might have occurred in the mother's life recently that might have been responsible for a shock relative to their life path or their purpose in life. Maybe it was the pregnancy. Maybe it's, oh my God, I'm pregnant. Oh, does this fit for me? Right? Am I supposed to be a mom right now? That could be the conflict for some of these women at least. And
We're navigating what the life will be once the baby's there, right?
Exactly.
So another example of that, of like, what's our life going to look like? There's a lot of directions that could go, right?
yeah, exactly. And it's the pain would occur only after you come to terms with this new experience in life. You say, okay, wait a minute, I'm happy to be a mother. I'm ready to be a mother, right? I'm going down the right path. And then they wake up the next morning and they go, ooh, I have, these sciatic shooting pain.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's specific to each individual. You have to really discuss that, their life story to really find these connections. But you're basing it off of the symptoms they're experiencing in their body to get an idea of what's the brain biological program running, affecting which part of the body, and then therefore what kind of experience must you have experienced in life for this program to initiate. And in the majority of cases, the symptoms show up after the conflict resolves. So what experience did you have in life? Well, when did symptoms show up? What did you resolve in your life just before symptoms showing up? Yeah, that's sort of the entrance into a deeper understanding of a person's life story, their experiences, and how it fits into their biology and their symptom expression.
And I'm curious where, and maybe this is a big rabbit hole here, but where different forms of healing arts and modalities enter the picture in terms of helping the person with their experience versus robbing the person of the experience. You know, like if we jump in and are quick to try to stop the symptoms, we might be potentially robbing the body of that experience. You know, like for example, if we're talking about a UTI, obviously you don't want to leave a UTI unchecked. That can be very uncomfortable and damaging to some of the tissue. But also it seems like if someone jumps in and treats it so quickly from the framework of German new medicine, we might be interrupting some of the healing process and some of those normal adaptations.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question. You know, the way I see it is it's not an interruption because we're not intervening in the mechanics of the body necessarily. We're bringing it to the level of the psyche to give the individual an understanding of why the body is expressing the way it is. We're not micromanaging the body here. As
Yeah, the
you know,
why isn't necessarily affecting the mechanics of the healing process. It's just understanding the healing process that's already taking place.
yes, but at the same time, I would actually add on to that yeah, understanding the why can very profoundly affect the healing process.
Okay.
But I would say for the better. Okay.
Yes.
I think there is like this, yeah, like the unconscious becoming conscious in an individual's life. It's an interesting question you bring up. Is there any kind of, consequence of becoming knowledgeable about the cause of your symptom? And, I don't see I can't foresee any reason why it wouldn't be beneficial to understand the real cause of your symptoms. What it's bringing you to do is it's really enriching your experience. It's giving you a greater wherewithal and conscious awareness of your life and the specific aspects of your life that are expressing itself biologically. So
Usually we approach things very physically in the way we look at things as humans is like, okay, if my low back is sore, I'm having sciatica, I must have slept weird or moved. It's all very physical, right? We're not addressing the psyche. Or for a UTI, for example, like, something physical happened or I was exposed to a particular germ. Again, we're looking at the physical level. But the complexity of this is certainly adding an element of depth to it, which I think is really neat about adding the psyche to it. I mean, putting the
yeah,
psyche into the picture.
yeah, absolutely. We've been operating in the mechanistic physical paradigm,
Yes.
myopically focused on the organ, the chemistry of the organ. There must
Which
be something
which
happening
isn't
there.
outright wrong. It just doesn't
No,
answer the
yeah,
whole. It's one piece of it, right? So you're looking at it, you're
absolutely.
like, yes, there are germs replicating, or yes, there are cells replicating, or yes, there is an inflammatory process or a lytic process of breaking down happening, but it's a portion of the whole, not the whole.
Yeah, exactly. The revelation is we couldn't really understand the phenomenon of
Yeah.
disease in this case, but really these biological programs. We couldn't understand the phenomenon of disease without a comprehension of the individual's psyche and their
Yeah.
experiences. I mean, it's a no-brainer once you realize it. It's like, of course, that's the other half of biology is our experiences, the reactions to our experiences. If you just focus on the organ and what it's doing and you try to derive an understanding intrinsically from that level alone, you're not going to get an answer. What you'll get is a kind of an idea of like, oh, we need to fix the problem. That's what you get is there's a problem here. We need to fix it. How do we invade and fix this problem? Because we're just focusing on the organ. Hammer was able to give us this awareness of not just focusing on the organ, but focus on the nervous system and the brain, where you find these real phenomenon governing the changes in the organ, and then also to focus on the psyche level. So it's this holistic integration of what we always knew we needed to integrate in the first place. Chiropractors recognize the importance of the nervous system. What is the nervous system? It's not just a mechanical machine directing the organs.
Yeah.
It's your experiential structure. It's how you experience the world. So by focusing on the nervous system, you're already well ahead of the game. And here we're finally making sense of how the nervous system now integrates with our environment, by way of these biological programs that explain and predict these disease symptoms that we've been dealing with for all of history.
And to take it a step further, right, we could say the state of the nervous system would determine how that experience lands in the body, right? The shocks that happen, right? If we've got very good nervous system flexibility, it's going to be less likely that it's going to be a conflict shock, and more that we're just having an experience. It's just, we just had an experience, right?
Exactly. That's why I find the chiropractic connection so valuable,
Yeah.
is by focusing on the nervous system, you really are focusing on the foundation of health with respect to disease. If you want to go in that direction, talking about disease, you really are focusing on the foundation of health in a very real scientific way, because you're improving the nervous system's capacity, its innate capacity to adapt to the environment. Yeah, Masha and Dasha, the subluxated nervous system, more susceptible to conflict shocks. I 100% believe that's true. Then you can add in nutrition and all the things that we like into the paradigm and say, maybe this bolsters the organic adaptability of the organism to conflict shocks. But yeah, this greater awareness of the German new medicine, tying these pieces together in an empirical new science, really is what brings us into that vitalistic paradigm, that next step out of the mechanistic focus on the function, or the chemistry, to the brain and nervous system, and to the environment and to the experiences. And now you get this full, cohesive new way of understanding biology. It really is like a new biological paradigm. So it's bigger than just, oh, I have a disease system, let me address it from a German medicine point of view. It's really like a new era in science and biology. And it's very fascinating. Yeah, very right. Fascinating. Yeah, 20, 30 minutes in, you already get right into the big, picture. And it begs that kind of investigation into these big questions.
Sure does.
Yeah. So
yeah, is there, I want to see if, as we're closing out here, is there anything you want to leave with our listeners, or loose ends you'd like to tie? I mean, I know we covered a lot of ground, and I think this is really fascinating, and I know we could talk about this at length for a long time. I'd love to have another conversation about this at some point in the future, and even encourage our listeners to investigate this for themselves more, because it sounds fascinating. But just want to see if there's anything else you wanted to tie together here at the end.
Yeah, I'll just say this to we didn't really talk about the GNM work.
Yes.
We kind of touched on it, how to begin the process of investigating the conflict shock by understanding what you resolved in life. But yeah, there's a whole new approach to dealing with symptoms and health by way of this new German new medicine paradigm of identifying the conflict shock. And that's a whole nother subject. So we can save that for another time where we really get into it.
No, that would be great. I mean, I think it would be really fascinating maybe we'll do a German new medicine part 2. We'll check that one out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd encourage our listeners in the spring edition, this one of Pathways. There's several articles about German new medicine and just about the intelligent adaptations and new ways of looking at biology. I personally found them really fascinating. I think our listeners will as well. So appreciate you joining us, John. Thanks for taking the time.
Thank you, Brandon. This is great.
Awesome. Take care.
Bye.